In today's segment of Mindful Leaders, we zoom into the life of Sona Tatoyan. Sona is a writer, actress, producer, and founder of Hakawati, a non-profit storytelling medium giving voice to marginalized communities. Born to Syrian Armenian parents in Baltimore, Sona grew up balancing two cultures between the American rural life and the Middle Eastern Syrian Armenian community. Her journey as a film writer and center stage actress has been paved thanks to mentors like Maya Angelou, Bill Esper, and Osman Kavala. She wrote Azad, a storytelling piece performed in Los Angeles, Boston, Berlin, and recently in Yerevan, which led to theatrical experiences entitled Azad, the Rabbit and Wolf, produced by Bill Pullman. In this episode, we dive deep into Sona's heart and soul to discuss the birthplace of her motivations, Urfa, Aintab and Kharpert. We also discuss the importance of authenticity, self-fulfillment, purpose, and mindfulness. Sona, what a pleasure to have you on Mindful Leaders. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Letta.
So you recently gave an impressive performance of Azad with the 1001 Nights. And I think that was the first time you performed that in Armenia.
That's right.
The story you told was about your great-great-grandfather, the puppeteer from Aintab.
Urfa.
Urfa,
Yeah.
from Urfa.
Yeah.
And the story also leads to how you discover yourself and the calling that you have by discovering more than 150 or 180 puppets, karagyos.
Ayo.
Right. And you found that in Syria in a trunk, and I guess your
My family home. Yeah.
family home.
Yeah.
This project is interesting. It's impressive. I'd like to know if you tell me more about what your intention is. Why is it important to you, and what do you want to do with it?
Yeah. So this thing has been a very organic process, like so much of my work, very intuitive, lifelong journey, I guess. The discovery of these puppets just catalyzed a whole sort of, like opened a portal, in my life in many ways. I wasn't expecting it. I had gone to Aleppo in 2019 for another purpose. I knew there were puppets. I'd heard there were some puppets there. I thought there were maybe 10 or 12. I was actually on my way to meet a puppeteer in Damascus, and I had heard that my great-great-grandfather did this form of puppetry, so I was intrigued, and I had started, researching about it. So when I heard about this one puppeteer left in Syria, I thought, oh, I should go meet him, and I was invited, and oh, by the way, I should stop at the house and check out and try to see if we have those 10, 12 puppets. I think we have.
10, 12?
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. And instead I find this wooden trunk in the attic full of over 180 puppets, an entire world, like human figures, animals, houses, like a whole cosmos, of puppets. And shortly thereafter, I fell down the stairs and broke my foot. And then, of course, we have that saying in Western Armenian, which I'd heard a lot because I've been very nomadic in my life and a wild traveler. And the storyteller in me immediately was like, okay, I'm in a story now. So I very quickly intuited that part, I was in my family home, which I'd never been in alone in my entire life, that had always been filled with generations of people, and there I was by myself. My grandmother had passed during the war. My family had left and come to Yerevan. And so it was this bizarre set of circumstances that I found myself in an empty house with over 180 puppets. And then everything I knew about these puppets they were used to do magic rituals. They were old shamanistic, so the box was actually full of magic tricks also, and the little Armenian, thing in his handwriting. My great-great-grandfather, this had potassium chloride, so he used to use it to like create smoke and illusion. So I thought, I found a magic box in a war zone. That's not what you think you're going to find in a war zone.
These puppets actually traveled since the 1800s, and they reached from Urfa to Syria, and here you are in this war zone.
Yes, discovering them.
Could you imagine how they carried that during the genocide?
That just gave me goosebumps, actually. It's still a story that really affects me because I hold them, and these are puppets he made, so I'm like holding in my hand the artwork that my great-great-grandfather made. you know, someone who I could have never met in this physical space-time because he's my great-great-grandfather. But I'm holding his art, and I just remember holding this puppet and having a flash because, you know, as a storyteller, as a visual filmmaker, you know, theater artist, I all of a sudden see the scene in my head. Like I'm imagining him in a workshop making these puppets. And it was like I was traveling through, you know, like space-time and imagining the moment he was making this, could he have ever imagined, you know, over a century later that his great-great-granddaughter is going to be, you know, holding
continuing his legacy, actually.
Yeah. You know, and it took me a moment to make that, you know, that epiphany I had by the end of my time there. I was only supposed to be there 2 weeks. I was there for almost 4 months because of the broken foot and so forth. But that realization that, you know, because I had this complicated relationship with my heritage, with my culture, because I'm first generation American, right? So I wanted to fit in as a kid in these small American towns that, you know, I grew up in. I didn't want to be different. Kids don't want to be different. They want to belong. And, you know, I grew up in a small town in Indiana. You know, there were no other Armenians, no other Middle Easterners, so they didn't know what we were. And I was attracted to storytelling from a young age, at the age of 8. You know, I was cast in the school play, not of my own volition, you know. I was cast as Alice in Alice in Wonderland, and actually the story is I got sick when they told me and had to be sent home. So it was kind of something that happened to me, you know. I always say I didn't choose to be a storyteller, it chose me. But that's where I found my joy and my belonging. And then it was this whole lifelong journey for me to discover, oh my God, this is actually an inheritance. This comes from my culture. So it's not just this trauma that I've inherited as an Armenian, which is always what I associated it with, right? Like sort of this dark, you know, the tragedy, the trauma, but the puppets and that discovery also showed me the light of my inheritance and that they coexist. They come from the same place.
While you're talking, there's a quote that comes to my mind. I can't remember who said it. I know it was an African American, but I don't remember who said it exactly. It was, it says, it's easier to raise strong children than to repair a broken man. Something of that sort. And evidently you spoke about trauma. We're all born into this fragmented world, inheriting the traumas, you know, not just individual, but also collective. And these are wounds that are they're buried deep inside of us. And I think about you and your family story and your history from both your mother and father's side. Yeah, there is a story that has haunted you for a long, long time, but I don't think it has broken you. I think it has made you whole because you were able to actually bring that wholeness, like you say, into your artwork, your production, your storytelling, your writing, your acting, everything that you do. I'm referring mostly about your story of Lusine Tatoyan. Care to share that?
I wasn't expecting.
No? Okay.
Yeah.
We can change the topic.
No, it's okay. It's okay. That's my great-grandmother on my father's side. That's the story that's driven my life's work because there's a hole. There's like a hole in the story. I just know that she was in Kharpert. It's a gruesome story. It's the most gruesome genocide story I know from my family. And she was 5 months pregnant with my grandfather, her first child, when her husband's head was delivered to her. And she gave birth to him, and then she in Kharpert on Christmas Day, he was born December 25th, 1915, and somehow stayed, and then in the spring walked to Aleppo. This is what I know. This is all I know.
Your great-grandmother.
My great-grandmother.
Who gave birth
to my
during the genocide.
To my grandfather, to my father's father.
Yeah.
And somehow this young woman made it with an infant to Aleppo.
Yeah.
And then what? And the questions, I've always been a curious person. What happened to her on the way? There's so much shame, there's so much silence like around that, right? Especially in our cultures, like around sexual violence, on anything that's like, so that has been the gas, let's say, driving that curiosity to understand that abyss, that emptiness. Because there's one photo of her that I've seen that exists, and her eyes are like hollows, you know,
yeah,
like you don't, what is she seeing? What? And she was a harsh woman, because my grandmother, my grandfather's wife, so my dad's mother, would tell me, I mean, she was not an easy, you know, mother-in-law, and like there are those stories, you know, and so, but I'm going, the part of me that wants to understand human behavior as an artist, that's the thing, like what drives us, what makes us do the things we do. Well, how could she not be? You know, like, not to make an excuse out of it, but that's what brokenness does. I mean, these are not just intellectual terms, trauma and the pain, and it's like they have consequences. You know, these things shape us. They make us do the things we do, that then we pass on to our children, that then they pass on to until someone finally goes, let's look at this.
Right.
You know?
Which is what you do also with your storytelling. Do you feel that this is where the work that you've been doing all your life, I mean, I didn't mean to trigger you, I apologize. I think the intention was to say, you have not been broken. You're actually have gone through your healing process. I think storytelling, when you hear your own story, like we spoke about earlier, when you hear your own story, that already repeating it, it's already going through that journey of I guess some kind of healing, right?
Yes, yes, we need to be heard. I think that is an innate human need, you know? We are storytelling creatures, actually, Homo sapiens. That's what we are. From the beginning of time, we've sat around fires with each other and needed to communicate our experience to one another. That's where myth comes from. You know, all these things, like, listen to me, this is my experience of being human. I listen to you, that's your experience of being human. And we navigate this experience called life. And we try to make sense of it through these stories, you know? It's that. And I will also say that I am of a generation, I think, removed enough from the actual wound to be able to afford to look at it this way. You know, like when I look at my father, he's done so much with being the son of a refugee genocide survivor, you know, who grew up in third world poverty, like, you know, born in Damascus, you know, was in Aleppo, wearing secondhand shoes on the streets of Aleppo. You know, he tells this crazy story about how they would be drinking water out of the river in Aleppo, and one day he looked next to the water he was drinking and there was a dead dog in the river, you know, that kind of thing. And he goes by way of Beirut on a Red Cross refugee visa to America, and he's able to become a doctor and, you know, build a life that generation is surviving. They're going from that to that, right? Which is a major journey. Doesn't have so much of, I think, the capacity or opportunity to then sit down and reflect. Like, I feel blessed in that way, that like, okay, so now it's my job to do that, perhaps, that metabolizing of the things that they, you know, like, that's this generation's job, right? Because I was afforded a life where I didn't have to do that level of survival, right? I was born in the United States. I lived in a wonderful, like, level of comfort, you know, got to go and didn't have to bear those burdens that my parents' generation did.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was beautiful. I think you said the word blessing, and I think the first thing that comes to my mind is that I feel that, you know, you've had many blessings in your life. You know, we're very lucky if we've had mentors or people who have inspired us to, you know, to navigate this you know, journey that we call life. You've had your fourth grade teachers who helped you actually find what was probably your calling.
Yes.
You've had, you know, other mentors or people who have inspired you, like Osman Kavala.
Yes.
One person that I want to mention that is sticking out in my head right now is Dr. Maya Angelou.
Yes. Yeah.
So Dr. Maya, so Professor Angelou, she was your professor.
Yeah.
In university, and you were lucky, which is very, very difficult to have her at that time when she was very, very busy being busy with a laureate, right?
Yes, yeah.
She, you had her for a semester, and she tells you something about
telling the truth.
Telling the truth.
Yeah. So I actually, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about that. It's interesting, like the way stories like sort of continue to live in us, right? And she was actually my professor twice. So I got into a spring course with her, performance and poetry class, and that summer it inspired me. She was just an inspiring figure, right? So I went back to LA and I started reading her autobiographical series, I Know, which starts with I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I think it's 5 or 6 books, if I'm not mistaken. And then I ran across Peter Balakian's book in the middle of that, Black Dog of Faith, which had just come out. This was the summer of 1998, maybe, 97, 98. And so I was really like, and Peter's book made me go, wow, that's my story. Like, because I grew up in small towns in the United States. So I didn't grow up in an Armenian community. And the first part of his book talks about being Armenian in America. And I thought, oh my God, somebody else has that experience, right? It's a story reflecting to us ourselves. And then the second part is his grandmother's story of survival. And the third part is about the geopolitical situation in the US and how at that point it was still not acknowledged, the genocide, and how everybody would say they were going to and then they wouldn't. And so I became incensed, like it just lit this fire in me, and I went back to university, and this was the great fortune that Dr. Angelou taught like one full semester course like every 10 years, and it was that following fall. And
how were you chosen to be?
I don't know. I mean, the divine God, I don't know, the universe, like fate. And so I got into this humanities course, which was called The Philosophy of Liberation in Literature. And we read incredible, James Baldwin, Maxine Kong Hingston, like all this great literature. And I happened to, at that same semester, be performing in a play called Mad Forest by Carol Churchill, which was about the Romanian Revolution and the overthrowing of Ceausescu. So it was, again, perfect alignment of all these things. And before I get into that story, my storyteller mind, I showed up to school that first day of class, and I went up to Dr. Angelou and I said, your story inspired and catalyzed this thing for me. And this summer I read this, and I came across this book by Peter Balakian, and she just put her hand on my shoulders and she said, Miss Tatoyan, when something is the truth, we must speak it. No matter what, we must speak it. And I mean, I'm crying, I'll never forget that moment in my life. And then she comes to the play, I invite her, my little 19-year-old self, like somehow it's like, yeah, she's gonna come to my play. And people are like, what are you doing? You're gonna invite Dr. Angelou? I invite her to the play, and she came. And she bought tickets for the entire class, so like 25 of my classmates, and like several of her friends. So they're sitting in the audience of the main stage theater at Wake Forest University. And in the middle of the play, in the second act, we're talking directly to the audience as Romanian citizens the day that we've overthrown the dictatorship, one by one telling our story in direct address. And all of a sudden, the theater erupts into Black church. Like she's going, yeah. And they are, like that old school way, primal of sitting around a fire, being in recognition of story, of the other person's humanity.
Because they also resonated with
That's
those
exactly
stories.
right. They were saying, yes, we see you, we hear you, we know what it's like to overcome struggle. And I will never, it was full body goosebumps. I got off stage and I'm with my two of my best friends. I'm like, what just happened out there? And that is the moment I knew what I was doing with the rest of my life.
Right.
Like that, I'm like, this is what this communal power of storytelling and what it can awaken in us, So yeah, it's a deep, deep blessing that mentorship, that intersection point in my life.
What a beautiful story.
Yeah. I was just at Wake Forest University, my university, a few months ago. They gave me a residency to develop. I'm currently developing my show Azad as a multimedia theater piece. So there's 50 of the puppets that are in the show. Ara Dinkjan plays the oud. It's about a 2-hour, multimedia projection, so forth. It's like 20 years of my work culminating in this piece. And they gave me a workshop, the latest residency, and I performed this show. This story that I just told you is in my show. I performed it on that stage where it happened, which was just, sort of the levels of coming home and like, wow. Yeah. It's like very, very.
How wonderful.
Yeah, it was.
I'm going to touch upon also some of the projects that you're working on currently as well a bit later. But, we live our lives either in attachment or authenticity. It's either we're living an authentic life or a life that's full of attachments. And a lot of us, and I will include myself in this, grew up, you know, sacrificing our authentic selves because of the need of the attachment for feeling protected, feeling loved, you know, the fear of disappointing others. You seem to live an authentic life. For people like myself, what are the measures that you think people should take, or what advice would you give for people to live more authentic lives, especially at a time where you still feel the need to have that human connection and the need to feel the love of others, and that's the sense of the attachment that comes in, obviously. What do you do? What measures do you take, or what is important for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think as human beings, we're navigating always these two things of connection and freedom, right?
Right.
Like those are the two things sort of in every relationship. All of us need some level of solitude, you know, to hear ourselves. And we need connection with others because relationship is mirror also in life, right? Like in Armenian we say gyanka, what is it? Gyanka martove or martove. There's a phrase like that, you know, Marta martove or something like that. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, for me, there is a voice in me that I have followed. I don't know where it comes from, but I know that the value of freedom for me has been slightly above the value of security in my life.
Or risk or change or
yeah, that's what I do know, that to feel that I can be who I am, like, you know, without that, I don't know if I can survive, you know. So I have taken a path that has been insecure, let's say, you know, like I didn't follow. My father wanted me to be a doctor.
Of course,
you know?
he's a surgeon.
He's a surgeon. You will always be needed. You will have an income. You will, you know, so I've sort of leaped off of that, you know, and I've needed to do this other thing. I've needed to do it, you know, like it's beyond a choice to me. So I haven't really actually sat down and reverse engineered why, you know, or where that comes from. I just know that it's who I am, and that every time that there's a power greater than me, and when I listen to that voice, I'm somehow taken care of by that power. And when I get scared and I try to be more safe, or I try to grasp at a thing, I lose, the things start to unravel. But when I sort of listen, and is it God? Is it consciousness? Is it, you know, it's the universe that wants us all to be well, you know, and taken care of in some respect, whatever we want to call it, when I trust that, things seem to work out, you know, like I'm okay, you know.
I call that mindfulness.
Yeah.
I find that you are being in the moment and you are allowing yourself to hear yourself.
Yes.
There's the you and the I,
yes.
But you are allowing yourself to hear what your heart is saying and follow that. It's the same thing what happened to you in Syria, for instance.
That's right.
The calling to stay, even though you were forced to stay, because
yes.
physically it was kind of like the world saying, or the God or the universe saying, it's time to stop, you know,
yes.
and if you're not going to do it yourself because you're not hearing my,
yes.
then I'm going to make it physically happen.
Yeah.
How interesting. What does mindfulness mean for you? And
awareness. I have a mindfulness practice that's sometimes stronger than other times, like a physical meditation practice. And you know, so much of this work that's gotten clearer, I think, and more grounded for me in the last years has come with that, more of that. So, you know, it was in 2016, I went on a Vipassana meditation retreat. And
Vipassana, for people who don't know, is a
10-day? Is a 10-day? Yeah, it's a meditation practice. It's a silent meditation practice.
Where you wake up at 4 in the morning.
Yes. And you sit in meditation in silence, called Noble Silence, for 14 plus hours a day, I think. Not all in one go, you know, with breaks and so forth.
What did that give you, that experience?
Deep insight. That first meditation retreat is where I got the download of my nonprofit, Hakawati. Like, it came to me in the silence when I got quiet enough and still enough and wasn't following the things that I think I should be doing. You know, I was working on a film project at the time and thinking I should go here to get money, I should go there to get, you know, all the things, because like I'm not impervious to the stresses of the world and the pressures of the world, you know. So even though I do follow my own drum most of the time, but there is still like, Sona, when are you gonna do it? What are you doing actually? You're working, you're teaching in Berlin now. Oh, now you're teaching, you know, taking yoga in India. Now you're here. Now you're there. What are you doing? You know.
But that reminds me of many people actually who do that. They don't take the time to stop. You have to ask yourself, why is it that you're always in that need to accomplish, to fulfill, to conduct, to perform, to. Did that help you actually come to a place where you can say,
well, that's
what's relevant for you?
Yeah, that stillness, it kind of made everything go whoosh. And in that was the drop, Hakawati. Oh, that's what my great-great-grandfather was called.
What does that mean?
It means storyteller in Arabic. And I had heard that phrase a lot. Oh, Abkar Dede was a Hakawati. He was a Hakawati. Because you know, my family was in Aleppo, right? And Hakawati, and the whole kind of, and it was in 2016, which was like sort of the height of the Syrian war in Aleppo, and the stories on the ground were not quite the same stories as the mainstream media in the West was telling, and I saw a parallel between that and the Armenian genocide and how we had been silenced a century before, and what were the consequences of that silencing and denial for over 100 years. We're still dealing with those consequences, right? And here was my family in Aleppo, you know, and that this was like, wow, this is happening again, and I want to be in service of creating a place and a space to help counter that in any way. So in dropped this nonprofit idea of, wow, how can we amplify and, you know, the voices of marginalized and frontline communities through storytelling and artistic practices to heal trauma. So that was the drop that came in my first 10-day Vipassana retreat, you know?
So you're going to tell us we should all continue doing Vipassana every year?
Every day. I mean, just like to sit in silence. Even
some people
for
have a hard time doing that. Right.
Yes.
5 minutes also would be, you don't have to sit there for an hour and a half, obviously, like you do during the retreat. But,
but just to sit and hear yourself. We're hearing the world all the time, and especially now with our phones, like there's just constant pinging, blinging, distraction. We listen to, we feel like the phone rings and we have to answer it. You know,
or you wake up in the morning, you have to start reading something.
Absolutely, right? So it's the outside that's always telling us what we need to do, which is a form of enslavement, actually, you know? But we are all so powerful. We are all so, like, we have everything inside of us. If we can still and silence enough, we can hear our own directive.
I fully agree with you.
You know?
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. You spoke about Armenianness and your identity being in Indiana, Alabama, Los Angeles. I mean, growing up in North America.
Yeah.
But at the same time, growing up also spending summers in this crazy place in Aleppo, you know, Aleppo and in the Middle East. So it's hard to actually be able to juggle, and I know this because I have had the same concern with myself, the dual identity, right? Tell me where you are right now in your life, and all the things that you've accomplished. What does it mean for you to be an Armenian?
Oh, that makes me emotional too. To me, being an Armenian is being a survivor and also a leader, you know? Like, the cheesy way of saying it for me is what breaks us makes us, you know? There is an art form, a Japanese art form that I love to talk about called kintsugi. Do you know what this is? It's pottery that when it breaks, you know, because in Japan in those ancient times, they couldn't, the China came from China, so they couldn't go buy a new piece, right? So they had to learn how to repair it, and they would repair it with gold, with 24-karat gold. So they would put the pieces back together, and it turns into this beautiful thing. So you've got lines of gold and it actually becomes stronger in the places where it was broken, right?
And even more special.
And more special. And more beautiful,
yeah.
You know? It's not just this uniform thing. It has something unique.
In the messiness, there's so much beauty.
Something unique and special comes out of it that couldn't have in any other way, right? There's no like, what is it called? Cookie cut. It's no longer a cookie cutter thing. It's a special offering. And I think that's the superpower, you know, that we can, that reframe on Armenianness as not, you know, a downtrodden, you know, victimized people, but that out of that can come a blossoming and an offering to the world, you know, that the places where we're broken can be our greatest sources of empowerment, you know. It's just how we're looking at, but we have to look at it. That's the thing. It's not a, oh, forget it, that was the past, put it away, because the way we work as human beings, stuff will bubble up. If you don't face it, you're not running, there's no running away from it. There has to, that's in the 1001 Night story, actually. Scheherazade chooses to face the darkness. She chooses to go to the king, right? And offer herself. And she has this plan, you know, with art and storytelling and offering creation as the antidote to destruction.
I think the arguments that many people give is that you can't move forward if you're stuck in the past. I actually don't see it that way. You're not stuck in the past. You're using the past to actually understand the present.
That's right.
And if you are actually more in the present by understanding everything that you have, you know, brought with you from the past, then your future will already unfold. I see that happening in your life in the way things are unfolding because you've given the time and the chance to sit still with it. Sit still with it.
That's right.
And that's opened up so many different inspirational pathways for you, and that's beautiful. What is your wish or your hope for humanity with all that's happening today?
To listen. To ourselves and each other. Listening. If we listened more, we could solve a lot amongst us, you know. Listen to ourselves first in order to find the places that we've been hurt, broken. And listen to each other to understand that we have actually a lot more in common than the differences that we think exist. The differences that we choose to amplify and therefore, you know, get rid of each other or whatnot. The source of wars and so forth. I've spent a lot of time in India, you know, spent 15 months meditating, studying yoga. That whole concept of the other is the thing that is the root of violence in the world, all suffering, genocides, war. That you are different than me, and therefore I must protect, because if you have, it means I don't have, and I must protect what's mine at all costs. But we belong to each other. We're here in coexistence. Everything, you know, we're made that way. Our body is a whole ecosystem that is interconnected, you know. So actually, your arm is your arm needs the rest of it to exist, you know, like, but that's how we are, that's patterned in the universe. So if we could find more ways to catalyze listening, you know, stillness and listening, and that's what you know, makes me like cautious about this world that is becoming hyper speed. It's a violent speed that we're in right now. You know, the constant communication, the irony that it's called. That we're more connected now, you know, the digital connection, when we're actually, it's causing a lot of disconnection. You see people sitting, we're all guilty of it, sitting in restaurants across from each other on phones, you know, but we need human connection. That's why when we have events that bring us together in celebration, we touch upon that, like that deep primal need.
Absolutely.
You know?
And that also develops more compassion, I think. That sense of compassion is also, you know, when you're not having that human connection or you're not enjoying in the aura or the spirit of others, it's hard to actually develop the compassion. You don't do it over the screen, that's for sure.
You don't. It alienates us. But also from our own selves, like being embodied, you know. Somatic practices, you know, you've studied trauma so much. Healing is a somatic experience.
Absolutely.
It's in the body. Absolutely. It's not in the mind. It's not a thought process. No. It needs to be released. That's why ancient practices like dancing, singing, correct, getting your body activated, and having it released through there, sharing stories, like these are all things that are embodied, right? They're not
well
digital.
I'm just happy to see that you're actually bringing all that back.
Thank you.
In such a beautiful form. I mean, the experience was exquisite. The music, the ambiance, the way it was told. I know that you have many other projects up your sleeve. I don't know when you have the time to do it, but definitely, I mean, even thinking about your a TV series that you've been producing and working on the, you know, it's on Aleppo, I think, with the three apples fall from heaven. I mean, that's another project coming up. Is there anything that you care to, other things that you care to share with us that will be interesting for us to know about?
Yeah, so the 1001 Nights experience, which you're talking about, and you were there on, you know, a few nights ago, that's a yearly thing we're building in Armenia and hopefully taking around the region, which I'm very excited about. Again, it's just bringing, not talking about politics, not talking about all, but just bringing all these different people together from our part of the world that are at odds with each other, and having them create instead, you know, and celebrate instead, and enjoy each other's humanity instead, right? And then Azad storytelling, which you saw performed as a part of 1001 Nights, is going around university circuits. It's been performed in museums, and so I've got upcoming residencies in the States for that at various universities, Stanford Medical School and so forth. And then the larger multimedia piece is called Azad, the Rabbit and the Wolf. And that's the thing that I'm very excited about right now. It's gotten a lot of support through theaters and various institutions, Harvard Art Lab and Wake Forest, which I mentioned, and hopefully on track to be produced and world premiered next in 2025. And that goes into my friendship with Osman Kavala also, and the transformative power that had for me. You know, I grew up, you know, like us, Armenian, inherited genocide trauma stories and the Turk and this and that, and then I met this man, you know, fortunate enough to meet this man 12 years ago who was working and and sort of devoting his life to being like a Scheherazade, you know, using creation to counter destruction and bringing together, you know, all these communities in Turkey, these minority communities, Armenians, Kurds, Turks, you know, together to create, and supporting artistic and cultural dialogue, you know, with his philanthropy. And you know, that friendship to me dismantled. I mean, there was a Turk in front of me doing all this work, so that story could no longer hold true for me. You know, the story of the Turk, you know, the bad Turk. Here was a Turk, you know, doing this. So it dismantled, it was...
Who was speaking the truth.
Who was speaking the truth, like Dr. Angelou said, despite it being dangerous, you know, and that, so he sits in prison now for that, you know. And he was the one that, you know, initially funded, you know, the start of Hakawati. He believed in this work, and he was a mentor in that way. I mean, and that friendship and that dreaming together, you know, again, across the aisle, right? Creating together, has inspired me so much. It continues to. I mean, it was, you know, he's sitting in prison, but when he was arrested, I was connected to Jamal Kafadar, the Turkish Studies department at Harvard. That's what got me invited to give my first talk, you know, about the discovery of the puppets. It's like, even like you can silence, you can try to silence a person, but you can't silence story, and you can't silence the truth. You know, if something is that powerful, okay, you put the man in prison, but his work is doing its thing, you know, and that to me is. That when I had that epiphany, wow, okay, it hurts that Osman's in prison, you know, and inshallah, the day will come. I believe he will be out. But the work he's doing, it's not about Osman, it's not about me, it's not about, you know, it's the power of that work and that love and that connection and that belief in humanity's better nature, you know. that cannot be silenced with any kind of nefarious government actions or anything like that. So yeah, but so my piece talks about that friendship and my own journey of that being dismantled and being turned on its head, and reframing the dark things in our lives. Like, everything is perspective, everything is how we see it. And if we are able to see it differently, it changes.
Yeah.
It changes.
Well, Sona, I mean, from the very short period of time that we've had a chance to get to know each other, I can honestly say it's always, I wouldn't say a pleasure only. It really is very fulfilling to know and to speak with somebody who actually is doing such incredible work in the art industry. And I say art in all forms, including with the karagyos, including with the puppets. Next time you bring the puppets with you,
I'm so sorry.
I want to meet them in person. I'm sure you've named them. I don't know if you've named all of them, but
well, 50 of them are cast in that show,
right.
And
but I have to say, I mean, I've been following the work that you've been doing, and I'm witnessing not just the good it does for your audience, but also for you. I'm impressed by the different journeys you've been on. Healing is not an end-all process. You go through your entire life.
That's right.
And that the important thing is to acknowledge it. That's the first step, is to understand that you acknowledge that there is something that you have to uproot and bring to the surface. And you've done it so eloquently. I only wish you incredible success, and thank you so much for being so honest and so beautiful in your stories.
Thank you.
I appreciate the time we had together today.
Me too. Thank you so much, Lara.
Thank you, Sona.